1800s, they had lived here for thousands of years, and in the span of a single decade, the United States government took it all away. This is not a story about politics or policy. This is a story about human beings, families, 1800s, children, elders forced to walk hundreds of miles into the unknown, and thousands of them never made it. 1800s. If you believe that history must be remembered, especially the parts that are painful, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We tell the stories that textbooks rush past. 1800s. New historical documentaries drop every week. Don't miss a single one. Long before there was a United States of America, before there were states or borders or presidents, there were people. 1800s. The Cherokee Nation had built something extraordinary in the lands we now call Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama. They were not wandering tribes living in temporary camps. They were a civilization, organized. 1800s, sophisticated, and deeply rooted in the earth beneath their feet. By the early 1800s, the Cherokee had a written language, developed by a man named Sequoyah, one of the most remarkable intellectual achievements in human history. 1800s, a single man who could not read English spent 12 years creating a written system for his people's language. By 1825, thousands of Cherokee were literate. 1800s, they had their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, printed in both Cherokee and English. They had a constitutional government, modeled in part on the United States itself. They had schools, churches, farms, and towns. 1800s, Cherokee leaders wore suits. They argued law, they negotiated treaties. They did everything the United States told them civilization looked like. And it didn't matter, because underneath Cherokee land, there was gold. 1800s. In 1829, almost overnight, white settlers flooded into Cherokee territory. They didn't knock, they didn't ask. They simply came, thousands of them, tearing up farms, occupying homes. 1800s, threatening families. And the government in Washington looked the other way. At the center of what was coming was one man. President Andrew Jackson. Jackson was a product of the frontier. 1800s. He had built his reputation fighting Native Americans. The Creek War of 1813 had made him a national hero. He believed with absolute conviction that Native peoples and white American settlers could not coexist. 1800s. Not because it was want them to. In 1830, Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act into law. The language was almost polite. Voluntary relocation. Compensation. 1800s. New lands west of the Mississippi. The government would negotiate with native nations, offer them territory in what is now Oklahoma, then called Indian Territory, and the tribes would peacefully move. 1800s, that was the official story. The Cherokee was something else entirely. The Cherokee didn't accept it quietly. They didn't simply pack their belongings and leave. They fought back, not with weapons, but with law. 1800s. Cherokee leaders hired some of the best attorneys in the country. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they won. In 1832, 1800s, Chief Justice John Marshall delivered the ruling in Worcester v. Georgia, declaring that the state of Georgia had no authority over Cherokee lands. The Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community. 1800s, their territory was protected. The forced removal was unconstitutional. The Cherokee celebrated. Justice had spoken. 1800s, but President Andrew Jackson reportedly looked at that ruling and said something that has echoed through history ever since. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. 1800s, the President of the United States had just told the Supreme Court that the law didn't matter. That power was the only thing that mattered. And in Washington, Congress did nothing to stop him. 1800s, the Cherokee were about to learn the most devastating lesson in American history, that a piece of paper, even one signed by the highest court in the land, means nothing when the man with the army decides to ignore it. 1800s, over the next several mounted, threats multiplied. A small, 1800s, unauthorized group of Cherokee men, without the approval of Principal Chief John Ross or the vast majority of the Cherokee people, signed the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, 1800s, agreeing to give up all Cherokee lands in the east in exchange for land in the west. 17,000 Cherokee people had signed a petition opposing it. The Senate ratified it by one vote. The clock had started, 1800s, and the Cherokee had no idea what was coming for them. It is the summer of 1838. President Martin Van Buren, Jackson's hand-picked successor, has inherited the removal policy and chosen to enforce it. 1800s, the deadline for voluntary Cherokee departure has passed. Almost no one has left, because why would they? This is their home. This has always been their home, so the United States Army comes to make them leave. 1800s, General Winfield Scott arrives in Cherokee territory with regular Army troops, 7,000 state militia. His orders are clear: round up every Cherokee man, woman, and child, and remove them from their land. 1800s, peacefully if possible, but there is nothing peaceful about what happens next. The soldiers move through Cherokee territory like a wave. Without warning, families are seized mid-meal, food still on the table. 1800s, fires still burning. Men working their fields are surrounded at gunpoint and marched away before they can say goodbye to their wives. 1800s, women carrying infants are pulled from their homes and given minutes, sometimes seconds, to gather what they can carry. 1800s, eyewitness accounts from soldiers who participated describe scenes that haunted them for the rest of their lives. One Georgia militiaman named John Burnett, who served as an interpreter during the removal, would later write, 1800s, I saw the helpless Cherokees arrested and dragged from their homes, and driven at the bayonet point into the stockades. 1800s, and in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them loaded like cattle or sheep into 645 wagons and started toward the west. He called it, in his own words, 1800s, the cruelest work I ever knew. The Cherokee are herded into internment camps, wooden stockades hatily built across Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Conditions inside are catastrophic from the very first day. 1800s, it is summer. The heat is not enough food. There is not enough clean water. The camps are overcrowded. Thousands of people packed into spaces built for hundreds. 1800s stockades like fire through dry grass. Dysentery, whooping cough, measles, fever. The elderly and the very young die first. Always the elderly and the very young. 1800s, and the Cherokee haven't even begun to walk yet. 1800s, Principal Chief John Ross, a man of mixed Cherokee and Scottish heritage who had fought for his people through every legal and diplomatic channel available, or watches his nation dying in cages. He negotiates with General Scott. 1800s, he argues. He secures one concession. The Cherokee will be allowed to oversee their own removal, to organize it themselves, to try to preserve some shred of dignity in what is being done to them. 1800s, it is a small mercy in the middle of a catastrophe. By the time the main removal begins in the autumn of 1838, hundreds of Cherokee are already dead, and they haven't moved a single mile west. 1800s, the journey itself is over 800 miles. They will travel through the mountains of Tennessee, across the frozen Ohio River, through the brutal winter plains of Illinois and Missouri. 1800s, and into the alien landscape of what is now Oklahoma. They will walk. Most of them will walk. In the wrong season, in insufficient clothing, on empty stomachs. The United States government had promised adequate food, clothing, 1800 to private suppliers. Men who saw a business opportunity in human misery. What arrived was rotten meat, insufficient blankets, wagons that broke down and were never replaced. Meanwhile, 1800s, white settlers followed the columns of Cherokee marchers, picking through the belongings they had been forced to abandon, stripping Cherokee homes, occupying Cherokee farms. Sometimes before the families were even out of sight. 1800s, the Cherokee called what was happening to them Nunna, daul, Tsuny, the trail where they cried. We know it as the Trail of Tears. 1800s, and as winter deepens, as the temperature drops below freezing across the open plains, the dying accelerates. Estimates vary among historians, but the numbers are staggering. Somewhere between 4,000 and 1800s, 1,000 Cherokee perished during the removal from disease, exposure, starvation, and exhaustion. Some scholars place the number even higher when deaths in the internment camps are included. 1 in 4, 1800s. 1 in 4 Cherokee people who began this journey did not survive it. And John Ross, walking among his people, watching them fall, is about to face the most devastating moment of the entire nightmare. 1800s, his wife Quatie, who had given her only blanket to a sick child on a freezing riverbank, is dying. Quatie Ross dies on a riverbank somewhere along the frozen Ohio River. She had seen a child, not her own child, 1800s, someone else's child, and shivering without a blanket in the brutal cold. And she had taken the blanket from around that child. It was an act of pure, instinctive human kindness. 1800s, it cost her life. John Ross buries his wife in the frozen ground and keeps walking, because there is nothing else he can do. 17,000 people are depending on him to keep moving forward. So he walks. 1800s, carrying his grief like the Cherokee carry everything else on this road, silently, with a dignity that the circumstances do not deserve. This is who the Cherokee are. This is who they have always been. 1800s, the column through the worst winter in recent memory. Temperatures plunge, rivers freeze, the designated trail turns to ice and mud, wagon wheels shatter, horses collapse. 1800s, the sick are sometimes carried by others who are barely strong enough to carry themselves. There are moments of extraordinary humanity along the way. Some white Americans living along the route offer food, shelter, 1800s, and kindness to the passing Cherokee, at personal risk against the grain of official policy. A few army officers defy their orders and slow the march when conditions become unsurvivable, choosing compassion over obedience. 1800s. But these are islands of mercy in an ocean of suffering. The deaths continue every single day. 1800s. Elders who have lived entire lifetimes in the Appalachian Mountains, people whose grandparents are buried in that red Georgia soil, die in frozen fields, hundreds of miles from everything they have ever known. 1800s. Infants who were born during the march die before they are old enough to have names. Young men and women who should have had entire lives ahead of them simply stop. 1800s. And the living mark the ground as best they can and keep walking west, because stopping means dying too. In the spring of 1839, the survivors begin arriving in Indian Territory, the land that is now the state of Oklahoma. 1800s, they do not arrive triumphant. They arrive broken. Roughly 17,000 Cherokee began this journey. Somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 never completed. 1800s, the exact number will never be known with certainty, because the United States government did not keep careful records of the people it was killing. What greets the survivors in Indian Territory is not the promised paradise. 1800s, it is unfamiliar land, different soil, different trees, different rivers, a landscape that holds none of their memory, none of their ancestors, none of their sacred places. 1800s, they have to build everything from nothing. In the middle of grief so deep it has no bottom, and they do, because the Cherokee are, above everything else, survivors. 1800s, John Ross lives until 1866, spending the rest of his life fighting for his people through diplomacy, politics, and sheer stubborn will. The Cherokee Nation rebuilds its government in Indian Territory. 1800s, they establish schools and courts and newspapers again. They plant crops in unfamiliar soil and learn the contours of a land that was not their first choice but becomes, over generations, their home. The resilience is staggering. 1800s, the loss underneath it is permanent. So what do we do with this story? We don't look away from it, that's what we do. For too long, 1800s, the Trail of Tears was a footnote between the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War. A policy decision, a line on a map. Something that happened to other people a long time ago, 1800s, that we don't need to think too hard about. But history doesn't work that way. The past is not a foreign country. It is the foundation of the present. 1800s, the land that American cities and farms and highways sit on today, was taken, not purchased fairly, not negotiated honestly, but taken from people who had built their lives upon it for thousands of years. 1800s, acknowledging that is not about guilt. It is not about punishment. It is about truth. The Cherokee people are still here. The Cherokee Nation is still a sovereign government. There are still Cherokee speakers, Cherokee artists, 1800s, Cherokee lawyers and doctors and teachers and leaders, carrying forward a culture that Andrew Jackson tried to erase and couldn't. That is the real ending of this story, 1800s, and must be named. But the survival, the refusal to disappear, the quiet, unbreakable insistence on existing. Nunna daul Tsuny, the trail where they cried. Remember it. 1800s, say it happened here. Make sure the people in your life know what happened here. The very least is remember, final visual, Cherokee land. Mountains, rivers, 1800s, morning light breaking through ancient trees, life continuing. Music fades to silence. 1800s, if this story moved you, if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, please smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. 1800s, leave a comment below telling us whose history you want us to tell next. History isn't dead, it's just waiting to be remembered.